Hello everyone, welcome to Drishti IS. You're watching the NCERT Foundation Series and we are going to cover the subject of political science with the help of MCQs and PYQs wherever relevant. So today we'll be covering chapter 3 but not in completion. We'll only be covering some portions of your third chapter so that we are able to focus on key concepts and read them in elaboration, and also the video doesn't get too long or taxing. All right. So this is your chapter 3 of class 11 NCERT and it is titled Election and Representation. Of course, we'll be talking about the introduction, which basically talks about the necessity of representation and therefore election in a large democracy. Then we'll talk about election systems in India. So the different types of systems that we have in our country. The elections, the third and the fourth portion, we'll be taking care of in the next video. So without further ado, let's plunge right in. Let's begin with the previous day question. In the context of right to freedom of religion, which of the following actions would be unconstitutional? And of course, you have a list of 4 actions. Now, right to freedom of religion is discussed within Articles 25 to 28. Now, let's look at the options one by one and attempt to arrive at the correct answer. A state-run school refraining from religious instruction. Now, this is pretty much not violating any of the fundamental rights. In fact, it is in alignment with Article 28 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about freedom as to attendance of religious instruction or religious worship in any educational institution. So this is exactly what this article is in alignment with. Hence, it is not violating or not unconstitutional. It is very much constitutional. A religious group conducting voluntary prayer meetings. Now, notice the word voluntary. Article 25 of your Constitution grants the freedom of conscience as well as the freedom to profess, practice, and propagate your religion. Also, Article 26 talks about freedom to manage religious affairs. This act seems to be in alignment with both the articles and therefore it is very much constitutional. Option C says a state imposing a ban on human sacrifice in the name of religion. Now, here again, we have talked about principled non-intervention in the context of our democracy and our constitution. That there is principled distance that the government or the state maintains when it comes to religious matters. So they do not intervene unnecessarily and they consider and treat all religions as equal. However, if there are certain practices that cause distress to health or public morality, then of course the state has the right to intervene. Therefore, this again is not unconstitutional. This is very much a part of our conception of secularism. Option D says the state levying a tax to promote pilgrimages of one particular religion. And this is in violation of Article 27 of the Indian Constitution, which says that should be a freedom, or there is to every citizen a freedom from payment of taxes for the promotion of one particular religion. And this clearly contradicts or violates that article, Article 27 of the Constitution, and hence this is unconstitutional vis-a-vis the right to freedom of religion. Option D, therefore, is the correct answer. Now, since we are doing chapter 3 today, or at least some parts of it, let's talk about elections, since your chapter is titled Elections and Democracy. Now, when we talk about elections, basically, why do we need elections? For the purpose of representation. In a large democracy like India, not every citizen can effectively participate in all forms of decision making. So there are elections so that citizens are able to choose their representatives and be key stakeholders or key participants in decision making. This is the primary purpose of elections, and therefore let's move on with this in mind to our first question. Which article of the Indian Constitution empowers the Election Commission of India? Now, the Election Commission of India is a constitutional body. All right, it is a constitutional body which is empowered under Article 324. Under Article 324 to superintendents, direct and control. Superintendent's direction and control of elections to the parliament, which is the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, the State Legislative Assemblies, and to the offices of the President and the Vice President. So, Article 324 of the Indian Constitution vests the authority or the power in an Election Commission of India, which will have the power to supervise, superintend, direct and control elections to the parliament, to the state legislatures and to the offices of the president and the vice president. Now, there are also certain key functions or key powers under this Article 324 that the Election Commission possesses. And what are those? Of course, the first one would be supervision, direction and control of elections, or basically you can simply say conduct of elections. That is something that you can derive very simply from the article given. Then again, for doing this, there also has to be a preparation of electoral roll, an upgradation. Either some names are updated or some names are omitted. Okay, people who are deceased, for example, their names are omitted from the list. So let's say preparation of electoral rolls is another function. Then you have enforcement of the model code of conduct. There is the power to enforce the model code of conduct to see and to ensure that there is fair campaigning. All right. Now, here again, when we are talking about supervision, direction and control of elections, we are referring to both legislatures of the state as well as the parliament, plus offices of president and vice president. We are talking about both of these. And finally, the Election Commission can order a repoll. The Election Commission can order a repoll in case of natural calamity. If there is a natural calamity or some violence or some disruption of any kind in any of the consequences, then they can either postpone or cancel the elections to that constituency. So this is the power of the Election Commission of India. In the Election Commission of India, there will be one Chief Election Commissioner plus any number of election commissions as the president may fix. All right, as the president may see fit. And presently, we have one Chief Election Commissioner with 2 election commissioners. All right. So this is all about your election commission in brief. Now let's go back to our question. Very straightforward question, but it's better to know some extra bits about this particular information. All right. So option C is our correct answer. Question 2 happens to be a PYQ. We have also discussed it in one of the previous classes, but I brought it up again so that you understand that some of these questions are lifted directly from the NCERTs. Question says, for election to the Lok Sabha, a nomination paper can be filed by. We are talking about election to the Lok Sabha, somebody who wants to be elected to the Lok Sabha. Now, there are a few options that you have to consider. There are a few limits or criteria that one has to consider. For example, in order to contest for elections in the Lok Sabha, a person must be at least 25 years of age. Further, a person must be a citizen of India. And also, a person's name should be present in the electoral roll of any constituency. Notice that the name should be present in the electoral roll of any constituency. All right, so any electoral roll in general. These are the 3 criteria following which a person is deemed eligible to file for a nomination or to contest elections for membership of the Lok Sabha. Let's look at this. Anyone residing in India? No, because even an alien or a foreigner could be residing in India, and one has to be compulsorily, necessarily a citizen of India. B, a resident of the constituency from which the election is to be contested. No, the person can be the resident of any constituency. So also, for example, if you notice, if we talk about our current Prime Minister, so he might have his name perhaps in the voter lists in, let's say, Ahmedabad, but he fights elections from Varanasi. So there is no such limit, all right? No such limitation, no such constraint. C, any citizen of India whose name appears in the electoral roll of a constituency. Now this is your correct answer. Why? Because it is fulfilling the condition of citizenship as well as the name appearing in the electoral roll. Of course, there is no mention of 25 years age here. However, there is no such mention anywhere. All right. So we have to judge the best option out of our given options. Option D says any citizen of India. No. Any citizen of India over 25 years of age. Any citizen of India could also be 18 years of age, 5 years of age, and they are not necessarily, or they're not, absolutely not allowed to contest for elections in the Lok Sabha. All right. The next question talks about the first past the post system in India and what it means. So this again is a concept that we have discussed in the previous, one of the previous lectures. But let's take a look at it again. So let's talk about the first past the post system in India. What do we understand by this system? See, this is the system that we follow to announce the winning candidate or to arrive at the winning candidate whenever elections to the Lok Sabha or the State Legislative Assemblies are held. Alright, what is this system? This system simply means that basically a country is divided into small geographical areas which are known as constituencies. So the country is divided into various constituencies. In our case, the number is 543. There are 543 constituencies in India. Then the second step over here, or the second point to remember over here, is that each constituency elects one representative. All right, each constituency elects one representative, which means that only one person wins the elections in one constituency. All right, there is only one representative to each constituency. And finally, who wins the elections? A candidate who secures maximum votes in the polls. All right. Notice here that we are talking about most number of votes and not about majority. So, for example, if there are 5 candidates, one candidate scores 35, the other scores 15, another one scores 20, and this becomes, then there is another one who scores 19, and then another one who scores, let's say, 11. All right. So even though there is no clear majority holder over here, no candidate has achieved majority, but we still can find a clear winner, who is candidate A in this case. Why? Because he has the maximum number of votes. Even if this person had, let's say, 30 votes, even then this candidate would win. All right. This system is known as plurality system as well. System of plurality. Why? Because we are not talking about proportionality or majority or some sort of representation in that sense over here, but rather whoever has the plurality of votes, maximum number of votes, wins the election. Why do you think that people, despite not securing a majority, are able to win the election? That's because all the votes that go to the other candidates are wasted. All right. So these votes who go to the losing candidates are considered wasted, and these losing candidates are not given seats in the legislature in proportion to the votes they have held. All right, the votes they have earned. So they may earn quite a few votes, but they will still not be given any representation or any seat or any membership in the legislatures. That is the first past the post system for you. This is in contrast with the system of proportional representation that we are going to study just in a while. Now here again, when we talk about first past the post system, we should also know why our constitution makers chose to go ahead with this system and not with something like proportional representation, which sort of happens to be slightly more complex in some ways, and we've also adopted some variant of it in our own constitution as well. Let's say, for example, while we talk about elections to the Rajya Sabha, there we use the tool of proportional representation. Why not did we choose this method, or why did we simply stick to first past the post system while we were talking about general elections or elections to the legislative assemblies, state legislative assemblies? And the reason is simplicity. You see, it's very easy to pick out a winner from here. Any person who likes a particular candidate may vote for that candidate, and eventually the results are declared by the number of votes, the vote margin. all right? And it is very simple even for a person who is not well versed with the nitty-gritties of politics and democracy and election to still be assured that we have a winner, all right? And this was particularly true when we were just talking about the independent India and we were just making the constitution for a newly independent country which had low literacy rates as well, all right? But this seems to be a more effective and less complex system of elections. So, on the basis of this, let's go ahead and try to solve the question. What is the meaning of the first past the post system? A, winner must secure over 50% votes. No, there is no need to secure a majority. That is the first condition that we discussed. Also, students, please remember that when we are talking about the first past the post system, that the electors or the voters are basically voting for the candidate. Mostly that is the case, that they are voting for the candidate that they like, because that candidate is going to represent them or be their elected representative, all right? B, candidate with the highest number of votes wins. Absolutely correct. This is in fact the meaning of the first past the post system. Option C says winner must secure majority in parliament. No, there is no such law or there is no such requirement. D, each voter can cast multiple votes. No, we have talked about it several times now, that every person has one vote and their vote have equal values, all right? So we have the correct answer, which is option B. The next question says under the first past the post system, a party can get a majority of seats even with less than 50% of the votes, because I told you while I was explaining the system, this so happens because whenever the losing candidates, whatever number of votes they get are wasted. They are not considered, all right? And in your book, they have given a very good example of the 1984 Lok Sabha elections, where the Congress party won 80%, approximately 80% of seats in the parliament, in the Lok Sabha. Does this mean that they also won 80% of the votes? If that were the case, then if that were the case, then this would stand incorrect, all right? No, they actually won around 46% of the votes. So they did not even win 50% of the votes in that election. However, they were still able to manage 80% of seats. Why did that happen? Because they were not given seats in proportion to the number of votes they had earned, and rather the votes that were won by the losing candidates stood wasted, all right? So this is the reason that the first past the post system, even a party with no majority in the sense less than 50% of the votes can win a seat in the elections. So this is your correct answer. Votes to losing candidates are wasted. If they were considered, then all parties would be given a seat in the Lok Sabha or in the State Legislative Assemblies in proportion to the votes they have earned. Which of the following best describes proportional representation? A, voters elect individuals. No, this is actually a feature of the first past the post system. This we have read just a few moments ago, that voters are basically casting votes for candidates, not the party per se. Option B says seats are allocated to parties in proportion to votes polled, of course. And this also reads in line with the question. Of course, seats are in this method of proportional representation. seats are indeed allocated to parties in proportion to the votes polled. And I'll explain this system to you in detail. One constituency elects one member, again discussed just a few moments ago. This is again a feature of the FPTP system. Candidate with highest votes win as usual. Also a feature of the first past the post system. So even if you are not sure what proportional representation is, of course the language of this option is very clear. It absolutely gives it away by using the term. Suppose this was framed in a more complicated language, then you could at least know that A, C and D options are referring to the first past the post system, and hence the only option that remains is the right answer in this case, which is option B. But before we go ahead to the next question, let's try and understand what do we mean by the system of proportional representation. Now, proportional representation is followed or is adopted by various countries, but it also has multiple variants. In the most simple terms, we know, most basic terms, we know that parties, it has to do with parties getting seats in legislature in proportion to the votes that they earn. This is the most basic understanding of proportional representation. Now there are two variants of it. One variant is followed in Israel and Netherlands. All right. This variant is followed in countries like Israel and Netherlands, wherein the country is treated as a large constituency. These countries treat themselves as one large single constituency. All right. So the country is treated as a single but large constituency. What happens here? Voters or electors are not voting to choose the candidate per se, but rather they are voting for the party. All right, for the political party. Now, these countries, or in this particular variant of proportional representation, we have a list of candidates in the order of a certain preference. All right. So there is a list in the order of preference. And of course, whichever party gets however votes, however number of votes are elected to the legislature. All right. So if there is A party, B party and XYZ parties, so if they have 50% of the votes, this has, or it could also be 30% of the votes, B has 45% of the votes, and so on, then what they'll do is they'll get seats in the legislature in accordance with the proportion of votes that the parties have earned. All right. Which also means that one constituency, because this is again one constituency, is going to have a lot of representatives. All right. Another variant of this proportional representation can be seen in countries like Argentina and Portugal. Here again, what happens? The country is divided into multiple constituencies, but they are not small geographical areas as in the case of India, but rather large constituencies. They are large constituencies. Here again, what happens? List of candidates in the order of preference is made, and then the voters vote for the party, not particularly for the candidates, and again multiple representatives for one constituency are elected. Of course, think about it. So there are, suppose 3 or 4 constituencies, large constituencies, and multiple parties are contesting elections for each constituencies, and of course they are elected. The parties get seats in the legislature on the basis of the proportion of votes that they have earned. In that case, one constituency is going to be represented by various parties like we just discussed, and there will be no clear or no single representative. And this is a very stark contrast. This particular feature of having no single representative is a very stark contrast with the first past the post system. Now there's also a third variant of this, proportional representation, which India has adopted for its elections to the Lok Sabha, but we'll come to that question and then we'll discuss it. So basically we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, all right? So this was your explanation. Now, the question is right about here. In India, elections to the Rajya Sabha are conducted through, no, they are not conducted through FPTP. FPTP is adopted to conduct elections for the legislative assemblies, all right, Lok Sabha as well as the state legislative assemblies. Mixed member system, no. Single transferable vote system, and party list proportional representation. Now this might appear to be a very tempting option because it mentions proportional representation, and we just discussed that India uses proportional representation for elections to the Rajya Sabha. I beg your pardon, but this is not the correct answer. The correct answer is single transferable vote system, and this is indeed a variant of proportional representation, and I would go on to say that this is also a rather complex variant of the proportional representation system. Let's try and understand what happens in the case of single transferable vote for the Rajya Sabha. Now, first of all, let's get it very clear that citizens do not vote in the elections to the Rajya Sabha. Who votes? The members of the legislative assemblies. They vote. All right. Now, also remember that each state has fixed seats or fixed representation in the Rajya Sabha. So, for example, UP has near about 31 seats. Rajasthan probably has 10 seats. All right. So, the MLAs are voting and the seats are fixed. Now, let's take a hypothetical example to understand how this system works. Let's consider the case of Rajasthan, and this is also the case that has been mentioned in your NCERT. Now, in the case of Rajasthan, let's just assume that there are 200 MLAs and 4 seats have to be filled. 4 seats are vacant. What is the methodology or what is the minimum number of votes that a candidate must be achieving in order to fill that vacant seat? Let's try and arrive at the quantum of votes now, or the minimum quota of votes. What is the bare minimum, the minimum quota of votes that a candidate must secure in order to be elected to the Rajya Sabha? Now, the formula for this is total number of valid votes divided by the number of seats for which elections are being conducted plus 1 plus 1. This is the quota for elections to the Rajya Sabha. And again, we'll move ahead with our hypothetical example of 200 MLAs and 4 vacant seats in order to arrive at a hypothetical minimum quota in this case. So total valid votes in the above case would be, let's say 200. The number of vacant seats are 4 plus 1 because of the formula, and then plus 1 to this calculation. Now this is 200 by 5, which makes it 40, and then plus 1. Therefore, a candidate has to win 41 votes at least in order to secure a seat in the Rajya Sabha. Now, why do we call it single and transferable vote system? Let me tell you why. So, suppose we have to fill 4 seats like we just discussed, and we have there, let's assume 6 candidates. Now, of course, the MLAs will have single vote each, all right? Every MLA is going to vote a single time. However, they are going to be voting in order of preference, in the sense that they'll have a list of candidates and they're going to mark their preference in front of the names of the candidates. So, for example, my first preference is candidate B, my second preference is candidate D, and so on and so forth. This is how I'm going to mark my preference in front of every candidate's names. What happens with these preference, because of course there will be, let's assume, around 200 votes. Naturally, someone is going to attain that quota of 41 votes very quickly, right? So that person is deemed elected. All right. What happens to the person who secures minimum votes? The candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated. And this candidate's votes are transferred. This candidate's votes are transferred to the next preference candidate. All right. How does it happen? So if I liked candidate B, but somehow that candidate B has not been able to secure a majority, not been able to secure the minimum quota, and has attained basically the minimum number of votes, then this candidate will be eliminated and the votes will be transferred to the next preference, which happens to be candidate D. Suppose candidate D is still in the race. This will happen till the time all 4 seats are filled. So here, even though it seems like the MLA, one single MLA has multiple values of votes, which is indeed correct, yet they have a single vote, which is transferable. Hence, the system is called single transferred vote, single transferable vote. All right. So basically, elections to the Rajya Sabha are indirect as well as preference based. And you know now why this is the case. So yes, it is the single transferable vote system. Why? Because every MLA has to choose the candidates in an order of preference. They have to prefer the candidate who attains the quota, the desired quota of votes, wins the elections, whereas the candidates with the least number of votes are eliminated and their votes are transferred to the next preference candidate, the candidate who was next in the list of preferences. Hence the term single transferable vote. Now what does this assure? This assures that Rajya Sabha has representation for all political parties in proportion of their votes, and that one party does not take or does not capture all the seats in Rajya Sabha, whereas that is indeed a possibility in the Lok Sabha. So this is the whole purpose of having this method for elections to the Rajya Sabha. So I hope this is clear to you. Now, which of the following is not a function of the Election Commission of India? We discussed a few functions under Article 324 while discussing the very first question of today's video. So let's take a look at these options and try to arrive at the correct answer. Option A says preparing electoral rolls. Yes, indeed, this is a function of the Election Commission. B, implementing the Model Code of Conduct. Absolutely correct. Option C says conducting elections to panchayats. Now remember, when we talked about the power of the Election Commission of India, we said that it has the authority to superintendent or to supervise, direct and control elections to the Lok Sabha, the State Legislative Assemblies, and the offices of the President and the Vice President. This was what we discussed when we talked about the power of the Election Commission of India. We did not talk about elections to the panchayats, as this is the function of the State Election Commission of each state. All right. Your option D says determining election schedules for the parliament. Yes, this is also a function of the ECI, and hence we are here at the correct answer. Now kindly look at the practice question that I have brought for you. This is on the more difficult side, I would say. This is not a very straightforward question, but since we have already reached class 11 NCERT, it's only fair that we also start solving very or slightly at least tricky questions. Now also this question was there in your NCERT book as well, and I thought this was a very interesting question to take a look at and try to attempt. Please take a look at the question and do send me your answers in the comment section. If you found today's session fruitful, kindly like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.